The auctioneer's voice carried across the yard the way those voices always do, flat and fast and indifferent. A sound designed to move things rather than honor them. A dresser went for $40. A wooden rocker with a faded cushion went for $18. A box of tools, labeled in a man's handwriting on a strip of masking tape, went for $22. The woman standing at the edge of her own lawn watched each item go with her hands clasped in front of her, and her chin up, and her expression set in the particular way that people set their expressions when showing what they feel would cost more than they can afford to spend. She was 76 years old and had lived in the white farmhouse behind her for 53 of those years, and she was watching the contents of 53 years go into the hands of strangers for amounts that would have made her husband close his eyes. She did not cry. She had been raised by people who believed that crying in public was a thing you saved for private, and she intended to honor that, even now. Especially now. On the far side of the folding table that served as the auctioneer's station, a man in a pressed polo shirt watched the proceedings with the satisfied attention of someone overseeing a process going exactly as planned. His name was Parker Holt. He was 41 years old. He held the note on the property, and he had been waiting a long time for this morning. Ghost smelled him from 40 yards. The big German shepherd went very still beside the truck, his hackles rising in a slow ridge from the base of his neck to the top of his shoulders, his amber eyes fixed on the man in the pressed shirt with the absolute, wordless certainty of a dog that has already reached its conclusion. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If this story moves you, please subscribe and stay until the very end, because what Logan Drake found inside that farmhouse and what Ghost already knew was wrong will stay with you. We read every single comment. We want to know how far this story travels. Logan Drake was 40 years old, and the kind of man you could look at twice in a hardware store and still not fully place until he moved, at which point something rearranged itself in your understanding of the situation. He was 6 feet tall and rangy through the shoulders in a way that clothes underestimated, with dark brown hair cut short, and a jaw that carried 3 days of growth without plan or intention, and pale gray eyes that operated with the unhurried sweep of a man who had spent years in environments where what you didn't notice could end you. His nose had a slight offset from a break in 2015 that he had set in the field because there wasn't time for anything more considered, and it had healed at an angle that gave his face a quality of having been tested rather than merely constructed. He was not aggressive in the way some men carry that energy visibly. He was restrained in the particular way that makes restraint itself a form of authority. The quiet of a man who has reached the end of needing to perform. He had done 4 deployments with the 2nd Ranger Battalion, Kunar Province in 2010, Kandahar in 2012, Ninawa in 2015, and a 4th rotation back to Afghanistan in 2018 that he had completed with a Silver Star for an action in the Korangal Valley that the citation described in language that felt to Logan inadequate, but not inaccurate. He had separated from service in 2019 with an honorable discharge. A knee that required 2 surgeries to stabilize and would never be fully stable again. And the specific, unclassifiable fatigue of a man who has been entirely competent at something that cost everything and is now required to find something else. He had come to Millhaven, Montana, a town of 3,000 in the Bitterroot Valley, because a man he had served with had grown up there and had told him once, in the kind of shorthand men use when they are not equipped to say what they actually mean, that it was the kind of place that let you breathe. The man had not come home from the 4th deployment. Logan had come to Millhaven anyway, 2 years after that, as a thing he owed someone he could no longer pay directly. He ran a small contracting business and kept mostly to himself and drove the valley roads in the mornings, and had learned that his friend had been right. Ghost was a 5-year-old German shepherd with a coat the color of pale smoke layered over black. A coloring so unusual that people on the street regularly stopped to ask what breed he was, which Logan answered with the same 2 words every time: German Shepherd. Ghost weighed 79 pounds and moved with a low-gravity precision that belied the speed he could reach in the first 3 strides. When he decided something required reaching, his right ear had a notch at the very tip, taken by a fragment during a compound clearance in Ninawa in 2015. A clean small cut that had healed to a V-shaped abscess in the fur that gave the ear a distinctive silhouette against the sky. He navigated the world with his nose and ears in a constant, overlapping cycle of intake, filing and cataloging at a speed and granularity that Logan had stopped trying to fully comprehend and had learned instead to simply trust. Ghost was not warm with strangers. He was fair. He held his assessments until he had enough information, and when he reached a conclusion, it did not change. In 2 years, he had been wrong about a person exactly once, and that person had, 3 days later, done what Ghost had indicated they would do. Logan had not second-guessed him since. Millhaven on a Saturday morning in September smelled of cut hay and creek water and the high-altitude clarity that comes to Montana valleys once the summer haze lifts and the sky gets the particular sharp blue that photographers drive 3 hours to find. The Alderman farmhouse sat 2 miles east of town on a county road, a white 2-story with a red barn and a fenced pasture that had run cattle for better than 4 decades. Logan had driven past it a dozen times on the morning route and had known it for what it was. The kind of property that looks like it belongs to whoever built it and is never considered belonging to anyone else. He had not planned to stop this morning. He had been driving back from the hardware store when he saw the vehicles along the road's shoulder and the sign at the gate, and Ghost had stood up in the passenger seat with both feet on the dash, and that was, as it always was, sufficient reason to pull over. Her name was Vivian Alderman. She was 76 years old and had been born in Missoula and had come to this valley as the wife of Carl Alderman in 1971 and had not left it since, which was not a constraint but a choice, renewed every year for 53 years, the kind of commitment that accretes into something indistinguishable from identity. Carl had died 14 months ago, a heart attack, sudden, while checking the east fence line on a Thursday morning in July, and had left Vivian the farm and a modest life insurance policy and a mortgage that had 15 months remaining on its term, and which Vivian had been current on until 6 months ago, when the combination of the funeral costs and a failed water pump and a winter heating bill that the life insurance hadn't stretched far enough to cover had pushed her into her first missed payment, then her second, then her third. Parker Holt had bought the note from the original lender 8 weeks after Carl died. This was not a coincidence. Parker Holt was 31 years old. Logan would learn this later and revise upward the calculation of what kind of person operated this way at 31 and ran a real estate acquisition operation out of Missoula that specialized, if that was the word for it, in distressed rural properties in western Montana. He had acquired 11 of them in the past 4 years through foreclosure proceedings, most of them belonging to families who had held the land for multiple generations and who had fallen behind on obligations due to illness, death, drought, or the compounding arithmetic of small farm economics in a large farm world. He had a lawyer named Clifton Ward in Missoula who filed the paperwork, and a process server who drove the county roads, and an auctioneer named D, who ran the liquidations with the expedient professionalism of someone who understood that the goods moving through his voice were not his too. Feel anything about. Parker had never been to court. He had never needed to. The documentation was always in order. The law was always, at the moment of the auction, entirely on his side. 3 of the 11 families had tried to fight it. One had gone to a local attorney who had found a procedural irregularity in the notice timeline that had bought them 60 days, and ultimately not enough. One had gone to the county commissioner, who had expressed sympathy and referred them to the same attorney. One had shown up at the auction with a sign and had been asked by the deputy Parker brought to every liquidation to move along, and had. Because they had no legal standing to do otherwise, moved along. Parker Holt stood at the folding table with his phone in his hand and watched the auctioneer work, and had the expression of a man watching a scheduled process reach its scheduled conclusion. And he had not yet looked at the truck parked on the road shoulder, and he had not yet noticed the big pale German shepherd standing beside it, with his hackles up and his amber eyes fixed, with complete and total attention on Parker Holt's face. Logan walked through the gate. He did not go toward the auction. He went toward Vivian Alderman, who stood at the edge of the lawn in her good coat, the navy wool one. The one she had put on because a thing that required witnessing required being properly dressed for, with her hands clasped and her chin up, and her eyes following a ceramic lamp that had been on Carl's nightstand for 40 years as it moved into the hands of a woman in a green jacket who had paid $11 for it. Logan stopped beside her. He did not say anything for a moment. That was its own form of acknowledgement, the recognition that there are situations where speaking first takes something rather than giving it. "Mrs. Alderman," he said. She looked at him. He had been in her line of sight at the county feed store twice, and at the gas station once, which was enough in a town of 3,000 to constitute a kind of acquaintance. And she looked at him now with the wary gratitude of a woman who is being seen doing something humiliating and is assessing whether the person seeing her is safe. "I'm Logan Drake," he said. "I live on the Ramsey Road. I'm sorry about Carl." Something in Vivian Alderman's posture shifted, not collapse, adjustment. The kind of adjustment that happens when a weight you have been carrying alone is acknowledged by someone standing close enough to have reached out and taken part of it. "Thank you," she said. "Can you tell me what we're working with?" he said. She told him. 3 missed payments. A notice of default she had received in July, which she had taken to a lawyer in Missoula who had told her the documentation was in order and her options were limited. A letter from Parker Holt's operation offering to purchase the property at assessed value minus the arrears, which she had declined because assessed value minus arrears was $90,000 below what the land was worth by any honest measure, and because the land was Carl's land, and she was not going to sell it for $90,000 below honest. The auction had been scheduled for this morning. She had spent the past 3 weeks trying to reach anyone who could help, and had reached no one who could do anything in time, and this morning she had put on her navy coat and come outside. Logan looked at the auction. He looked at Parker Holt at the folding table. Ghost, who had come through the gate behind him on a loose leash, looked at Parker Holt also, and made the low sound, not a growl, quieter than a growl, the sound of a judgment being recorded, rather than announced. "How much are the arrears?" Logan said. $14,200, Vivian said. "And the lawyer's fees?" "And the auction costs, which they add on." Logan did the arithmetic. He had done similar arithmetic once before, in Kandahar, involving resources and timelines and what was possible versus what was necessary, and the process was the same regardless of the currency. "I need to make some calls," he said. "How much time do we have?" Vivian looked at the auctioneer, who was working through the furniture at a pace suggesting the personal property would be cleared in 40 minutes. "After the personal property goes, they move to the deed," she said. "An hour, maybe, all right," Logan said. He made 4 calls in 53 minutes standing at the fence line with Ghost beside him, working the phone with the focused economy of a man who knows exactly which calls in which order accomplish what. The first was to a woman named Ruth Mackey, a Missoula attorney he had been put onto by a former ranger named Cole, who had used her in a property dispute 2 years earlier, and described her as the kind of lawyer who reads contracts the way rangers clear buildings. Every room. No assumptions. Ruth picked up on the second ring and listened to the outline of the situation without interrupting, and said she had one question. Had the original notice of default been sent to Vivian's correct legal address of record, or to the farm's rural route number, which in Montana counties had different legal standing? Logan relayed the question to Vivian. Vivian said she had received it at the rural route number. Ruth said she needed 15 minutes to verify the county's notice requirements. The second call was to a man named Jackson at the Ravalli County Agriculture Extension Office, who confirmed, when Logan described the operation, that Parker Holt's firm had been the subject of 2 separate complaints to the State Agriculture Commissioner in the past 18 months from families in Ravalli and Missoula counties who had lost properties through what they described as predatory note acquisition, and that both complaints were under review and had not yet produced action. The third call was to a reporter named Anna Sweeney at the Missoulian, who covered rural land issues, and whose name had appeared on a series of articles about out-of-state land acquisition in western Montana that Logan had read the previous winter and filed without knowing he would need. Anna picked up on the first ring, because reporters who cover things that matter to people answer their phones, and she asked him to text her the address. The fourth call was back to Ruth Mackey, who said the following. The notice of default, under Montana Code Annotated Section 711304, was required to be sent to the property owner at their address of legal record as filed with the county assessor, which in Vivian Alderman's case was a post office box in Millhaven she had held for 30 years. The rural route delivery did not constitute valid legal notice under the statute. The foreclosure proceeding was procedurally defective. The auction had no legal standing to convey the deed. Logan walked across the yard to the auctioneer's table. He did not walk quickly. Ghost walked at his left knee with his ears forward and his body very low, not crouching, compressed. Every pound of him present and accounted for in carrying the specific tension of a dog that has been patient long enough. Parker Holt looked up from his phone and saw them coming and rearranged his expression into the one he used for interference, which was a version of bemused patience. "Sir, this is a private proceeding," Parker said. Logan stopped in front of the table. Ghost stopped with him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The auctioneer, mid-sentence on a box of kitchen goods, trailed off. The people in the yard, 12 or 15 of them, neighbors and strangers mixed, the particular composition of a small-town auction, went quiet in the way crowds go quiet when something has changed in the air. Ghost sat down directly between Logan and Parker Holt. He did not move. He placed himself in the exact center of the space between the two men and sat with the formal, unambiguous deliberateness of a dog performing a function, not a dog waiting for instruction. His pale eyes held Parker Holt's face. Parker Holt looked at the dog and something moved through his expression that was not quite recognition and not quite fear, and was a precise combination of the two. Logan introduced himself by name and rank. He said, "Sergeant First Class Logan Drake, retired, 2nd Ranger Battalion, United States Army." He said it the way he had been trained to begin every engagement, with identification, complete and unambiguous, so there was no later dispute about who had said what to whom. He then told Parker Holt, in the same unhurried, factual voice he had used for every briefing in his adult life, that Ruth Mackey, attorney at law in Missoula, had reviewed the notice of default documentation, and determined that the notice had been delivered to a rural route number rather than Vivian Alderman's legal address of record, as required under Montana Code, annotated Section 71-1304, and that the foreclosure proceeding was accordingly procedurally defective, and the auction had no standing to convey title. He said that Ruth Mackey was filing for an emergency injunction in Ravalli County District Court that morning, and that a copy of the filing would be served on Parker Holt's operation at his Missoula address by end of business. He said that the Ravalli County Sheriff's Office had been notified and that a deputy was en route. He said that Anna Sweeney from the Missoulian was also en route and had expressed interest in speaking with Parker Holt about the pattern of complaints filed with the State Agriculture Commissioner. He paused. "I'm giving you the information," Logan said. "What you do with it is your decision." Parker Holt's expression had moved through several arrangements during this recitation. It had started in the bemused patient's register, had passed through something harder and more calculating, and had arrived somewhere that was not quite the place Parker Holt intended it to be. A tightness around the mouth, a particular stillness, the face of a man whose machinery is running fast behind an exterior he is working to hold steady. He looked at Logan. He looked at Ghost, who had not moved from the center of the space between them, who was still sitting with that formal, undeflectable attention trained on Parker Holt's face. Parker Holt looked at the auctioneer. The auctioneer looked at his clipboard and made the professional calculation of a man whose contract was with the proceeding and not with the outcome, and said that in the event of a legal question regarding the title transfer, it was standard practice to halt the auction pending resolution. Parker said, through teeth that were making a visible effort, "This isn't over." Logan said nothing. Ghost's tail moved once, a single slow beat against the ground, and then was still. The deputy arrived 12 minutes later. Anna Sweeney arrived 20 minutes after that. The injunction was granted the same afternoon by the Ravalli County District Court judge, who noted in her ruling that the notice defect was unambiguous and that the proceeding had been halted appropriately. Parker Holt's attorney Clifton Ward filed a response the following week, arguing that rural route delivery had been accepted practice in previous county proceedings. Ruth Mackey's response to that response was 14 pages long. The court did not find Ward's argument persuasive. The full investigation that followed, triggered by Anna Sweeney's coverage, which ran in the Missoulian over 4 installments, and was picked up by the Associated Press, documented the 11 properties Parker Holt's operation had acquired through foreclosure proceedings, and identified notice defects in 7 of them that shared the same rural route delivery pattern. 3 of those cases were reopened by the courts. In 2, the families were able to reclaim their properties through negotiated settlements funded in part by a restitution order attached to the civil fraud finding against Parker Holt and Clifton Ward. Parker Holt's real estate acquisition firm was dissolved under the terms of a consent decree with the Montana Attorney General. Clifton Ward agreed to a 2-year suspension of his law license. The state legislature passed a Rural Notice Clarification Amendment to the foreclosure statute the following session, which 2 advocacy groups credited to the Millhaven case. The Alderman property stayed in Vivian's name. The arrears were resolved through an emergency loan from a Montana Agricultural Preservation Fund that Ruth Mackey had identified and applied for on Vivian's behalf in the same week as the injunction, at a rate that the remaining mortgage term could absorb. Logan had spent 4 Saturdays that fall repairing the east fence line and replacing 2 rotted posts in the barn that Carl Alderman had flagged on a maintenance list he kept on a clipboard inside the barn door, in handwriting that Vivian could not yet look at directly, but that she had left exactly where it was. 8 months after the September morning, Vivian Alderman sat in a chair on the farmhouse porch in May with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness of a woman who has returned to something she did not expect to keep and is making peace with the fact of still having it. Ghost lay across the porch boards at her feet, flat and warm and entirely at ease. The pasture fence held. The barn was sound. The ceramic lamp was back on the nightstand where it had been for 40 years, purchased back from the woman in the green jacket for $11, plus a jar of Vivian's tomato preserves, which the woman had said was more than fair. Logan sat in the other chair with his coffee. The knee ached the way it always ached in the mornings, and the valley held the particular green of Montana in May that his friend had told him about, and that he had been right about. And the mountains to the west still had snow on them, and the creek at the bottom of the property was running full and cold and audible from the porch, if you were quiet enough to hear it. He was quiet enough. He had been practicing. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder from the sky. Sometimes they pull over on a county road because a dog stands up in the passenger seat before the driver has seen what needs seeing. And the driver has learned, through years of being in places where learning this cost something, to follow what the dog already knows. God does not always send the cavalry. Sometimes he sends one man and one dog and a fence-line phone and 53 minutes. And that is enough. Because enough is what he calibrates to the need. There are Vivian aldermans on county roads in every state in this country. Women in good coats, standing at the edge of what they built with the people they loved, watching strangers carry it away in boxes for amounts that are an insult to what it cost to fill those boxes. They do not ask for help. They put on their good coats, and they hold their chins up, and they endure, because that is what they were taught to do. That is exactly why someone needs to pull over. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that the right person showing up at the right moment is not an accident. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, and if you have ever watched something that mattered be taken apart piece by piece and felt helpless to stop it. We would like to hear that. Your story may reach someone today who needs to know they are not alone in that feeling. If you believe in stories of service, loyalty, and the grace of a single moment that changes everything, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, protect your family, and keep you watchful. And may He always send someone down the road at the moment the auction is about to start.